Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Downtown Windsor Farmers Market's Chef's Table. I'm here at the Chef Next Door cooking studio that's part of the Twisted Apron restaurant in Walkerville. And I'm so excited to be here with two fabulous chefs. We've got Anna and Simon, and they're gonna lead us through a little cooking demo. And Anna's gonna take it away and tell us what she's gonna be making today with Simon.
So today we're going to be making this really great mushroom strudel. It's a vegetarian dish, but it can be very easily made into a vegan dish. And we got to use some amazing producers from the market. So we're using Mushroom Hub mushrooms, which are very, very popular because they're exceptional. We also used Our Farm's Organics, which are out in Cottam. We use their shallots, their garlic, and their parsley. And then two other products that we have today, or three other rather, are our cauliflower, our thyme, and microgreens, and those came from our own garden that we grew because we believe it's really important to learn how to grow your own food so you can appreciate making sure that we're not wasting and also understanding where your product comes from and how to take care of it properly.
Part of this dish today is the strudel. Strudel is essentially a layered pastry. Usually a sweet element would go inside. Today we're using phyllo pastry. We brush each layer with butter, so it gives a really nice flaky texture to the pastry. And we fill it with what's called a mushroom Duxelle. Now mushroom Duxelle is essentially very finely chopped mushrooms. And we're using the mushrooms from the Mushroom Hub. Today we have maitake mushrooms and we have oyster mushrooms. So what we're gonna do with this is we're going to sweat these mushrooms down because the mixture has to be fairly dry like so. If you have a very, very wet mixture going into this, it's going to make the pastry incredibly soggy. And that's not what we want. So we're going to start off with finely diced shallot and garlic that we got from the market. Okay, so we're going to sweat this down. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with a little bit of butter and oil. The oil will stop the butter from burning, but the butter will obviously flavor everything. So we have a little cast iron pan here on our induction burner, a little bit of oil. So we'll let this melt, and then we're going to sweat down our shallots and then our mushrooms. Now here we have some of the oyster mushrooms and the maitakes cut up, and we're gonna saute those in some butter and some oil as well. And we're gonna fold that into our Duxelle. The Duxelle is almost like a stuffing, and it's going to carry or suspend these mushrooms. So we're going to have a bit of a texture sort of difference in our strudel. So in we go with the shallots and garlic. Now, because the shallots and garlic are very finely chopped, you have to be careful that we don't overcook these. Once you start to get too much color on these, it's going to burn, and then we're going to end up with a bitter taste. Okay, so we just want this sort of the shallots to be translucent, and we want the garlic to be cooked through. So we're looking pretty good here. It doesn't take long. It really doesn't take long. So we're going to add our finely chopped mushrooms. Now this is going to take a few minutes because the mushrooms are going to leach their water out. There's a lot of moisture in mushrooms. So what we want to do is we want to evaporate all that moisture as much as we possibly can. Because like I said, you put a wet filling into this pastry, it's going to become soggy. So we season as we go. A little bit of salt, tiny bit of pepper. Now for my mushrooms, we're going to saute these in the butter and the oil. So again, butter, a little bit of oil to stop that butter from burning. Already in this pan, I'll show you in a moment the amount of moisture that's going to come out of these mushrooms. You'll be quite surprised. And it's key to get rid of that. Okay, so we'll add our mushrooms here. And we're just going to saute these, a little bit of salt. It looks like a lot of salt, but in the grand scheme of things, it's actually very little. It's just enough to flavor it. Okay, so the moisture is actually evaporated incredibly quickly from these. So we're in a good space for our Duxelle. Okay, so you can see these mushrooms are cooking down beautifully. These mushrooms from the Mushroom Hub are absolutely fantastic. They're so meaty, so rich. Our Duxelle is almost finished, so we're gonna add our herbs. We have parsley and thyme. The parsley came from
Our Farm's Organics.
And the thyme came from my back garden. That goes in. You can smell the thyme coming off this so nicely. Thyme's one of my most favorite herbs to use. Great with chicken, great with mushrooms. We're gonna just wait a second while these get a bit more golden, and then we'll transfer them over here. Yeah, it's great. Look at the caramelization on that, it's beautiful. Make sure we don't get any of this excess fat in here. So our Duxelle is finished with our mushrooms. So the next thing we gotta do is taste. You've always gotta taste your product. There's nothing worse than going out to a restaurant, they haven't seasoned properly, or you have guests over, you haven't seasoned properly. It's not gonna taste of anything. A little bit more salt. And we'll be just great. So there you have it, that's the filling for our strudel. We're now gonna move on and assemble the strudel. To make strudel, if you're making it traditionally, you would make a dough and then stretch it out over a table and roll it up almost like a log. Today we're using phyllo pastry. You have to work very quickly because it dries out very quickly. So we take a single layer, lay it down, and we have melted butter. You want a pastry brush for this? So now we brush the pastry all over with butter. I think in moderation, eating butter is just fine. Butter's also full of flavor. Now I'm using unsalted butter. Please do not use salted butter for this. We have the right amount of salt in our recipe. We don't need to be adding more salt. So I have one layer down. Now I'm gonna take another layer and drape it on top. We're gonna butter that. So again, these layers of pastry with butter in between are gonna create such a very lovely, light, flaky pastry that our Duxelle and mushroom mixture will be wrapped in. With the remaining phyllo, let's cover it up with a damp cloth. It'll stop the phyllo from drying out, and it'll be easy to work with. We have a Duxelle and mushroom mixture. What I'm gonna do is half a cup to a cup's worth of mixture. I would say about 4 inches from the bottom of the phyllo pastry. We're in a nice little rectangle like so. Then we're gonna fold it up like a parcel. So what you wanna do is take the bottom, fold it over your mushroom mixture, press it down on the sides. More butter. You want those layers, right? Now the sides come in. And guess what? More butter. If you're not into butter, there's a vegan butter on the market. Please don't use margarine. Okay, we fold this over. Yet again, more butter. Okay, now we've done that. We're gonna fold the rest of it up. Over once, over twice, over 3 times. A tray if you're doing many, if not a small pie plate like this. Parchment paper on the bottom though, that way it'll stop the pastry from sticking. But before you do that, more butter. You're gonna brush the outside with butter. This is gonna make the pastry so crisp and golden. So we'll get the butter nice and cool, and then we'll pop it in the oven. One last thing we're gonna do, you're gonna make 3 little cuts, like so, in the top of this pastry. It helps let the steam out, so the pastry won't burst, and it gives it a nice sort of presentation. So we cut, and we cut. Mushroom strudel, this is gonna go in the oven for 20-25 minutes or until golden brown. We'll give it about 20 minutes, see how we get on.
I'm gonna show you how we're gonna make the accompanying ingredients here with this dish. So the first is a cauliflower puree. The first thing that you wanna do is cut your cauliflower into small floret shapes. This will allow it to cook a little bit faster, and we wanna make sure that they're fairly even in size. It makes sure that everything cooks at the same time and that we're not waiting for a big piece of cauliflower while all the little ones are getting mushy. So here in this pot, I have a little bit of cream and I have a little bit of water, and we're using that as a poaching liquid in a way. We're just gonna bring it up on the heat, and we're gonna add our cauliflower to it. And you just wanna poach your cauliflower until it's done, until it's nice and tender and nice and soft. Normally when we steam a vegetable, we want a little bit of crunch still there. We don't want this in this case. We want it to be nice and cooked through so that it'll puree really nicely and be super, super smooth. In this liquid as well, I've also seasoned it with some salt because I want to make sure that I'm seasoning this at this stage. At the end, it's a little bit more challenging, but we can do it as well. So I'm gonna let this come up to a nice simmer, not a boil, because there is cream in it. When you boil a dairy product, solids are gonna start to form, and that's when it gets separated and it's gross. So we don't want that. We just want to gently poach it until it's nice and soft. And then when it's finished, we're gonna add it to the Vitamix blender or whatever blender you have at home. It's important when you add it to your blender that you don't add all the liquid. You wanna use a slotted spoon or a strainer and put only the cauliflower bits in there. And then you're only gonna use a little bit of liquid that you poached it in, or if you're using a vegan recipe, you can use your cashew milk, soy milk, almond milk, any of those options. You just add a little bit at a time just to make sure the blender can start going. What we're looking for in the end is a really smooth, super silky puree. So it's going to be almost pudding-like consistency. There's absolutely no bumps, no lumps. Everything got pureed nicely. And we use a little bit of liquid just to get it going and make it super smooth. At this stage too, you can season it with salt. And if you want pepper, go for it. But we usually do just salt so you don't see any black flecks. And it comes out really beautiful and it'll be the base of our dish, which we'll show you how to plate in a minute. So now I'm going to show you guys the next stage, which is our butter poached shallots. So these shallots we got from Our Farms Organics out in Cottam, and they're absolutely stunning. They're really, really beautiful. So we've gone ahead and peeled them, but we keep the shape. We want to keep everything about this shallot to look original to how it grows from the ground, because why eat something if we can't keep it the way it looks, right? We've peeled them. And we're just gonna add them into a mixture of butter and water, about even parts. We're at a gentle simmer, and I'm just gonna add these in there, and they're gonna stay that way until they're fork tender. So go ahead and pierce it with a little paring knife, and as long as it goes all the way through with absolutely no resistance, you have beautiful cooked poached shallots. So just a nice gentle simmer. This will go for about 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the size of your shallots. And just like with the cauliflower, you want them to be fairly uniform in size so that everything cooks at the same time. Okay, so now I'm gonna show you how we're going to saute the mushrooms from the mushroom hub to add on the side of the dish. So even though our parcel had a lot of mushrooms inside, we wanna reiterate the idea that this whole dish is about mushrooms and celebrating mushrooms. So we add a little bit of sauteed garlic mushrooms to it. So here from the mushroom hub, we've got the oysters and the maitakes. And we leave these fairly whole and in large size format because just like the shallots, we want to maintain the integrity of the actual vegetable. So I have a hot pan here, and to it I'm going to add some butter and a little bit of oil. Again, like we did before, the two mixtures together sort of ensure that we have a higher smoke point and that the butter isn't going to burn. And then I'm just going to add in my mushrooms nice and whole. You can add both at the same time. They're going to cook with roughly the same length of time. And this is over a medium to medium high heat. We want to get a really nice caramelization on the mushrooms. It'll give them a little depth of flavor and make them a little bit more delicious. We're just going to season our mushrooms, a little bit of salt, and just a touch of pepper. And super important, we're going to let this cook all the way down until they're nice and tender. And right at the end is when we'll add in our garlic and our parsley and thyme. And the reason why we do it at the end is because we don't want the garlic to get too bitter or too cooked. We want its pungentness to come through that we got from Our Farms Organics. And also with your herbs, you always add it at the end because it maintains their bright color and their freshness. So we're probably about halfway through the cooking process with our mushrooms. I'll add my garlic in now. So I'm gonna add in some of our herbs. And then we're ready to go. We're ready to plate our dish.
So we have the strudel out of the oven. The strudel is nice and golden. It's not too dark. You get it any darker than this, the pastry is going to be quite bitter. It's also on parchment paper, so it slides around nice and easily, and you can also pick it up nice and easily. So we have our mushrooms with the garlic and the herbs. The shallots that are poached in the butter and water, nice and tender. They're going to be super sweet. And look at the color, the contrasting color between everything else in the dish. These are really going to pop on the dish. And the beautiful smooth puree of cauliflower. Really, really nice and velvety. This is what you want. No lumps, very creamy, very, very delicious. And lastly, we have the microgreens. So these microgreens, these are radish, and these are yellow peas. And the great thing about the yellow peas is they get these beautiful sort of string-like strands on the ends that I find really nice. You want to start off with a bread knife. The reason why, or a serrated knife, the reason why we want to use this is so we get a nice cut through the initial part of the pastry. If you were to try and use your chef knife, you're going to crush the pastry and the strudel itself will end up being squashed. And the great thing about this is as well, because we have the little diagonal cuts in our pastry, it gives you a good marker to get started with your first cut. Let the knife do the work. Once you're almost all the way through, take your chef knife, finish the cut. We then end up with this beautiful strudel. Anna's going to plate the puree.
So we're just going to add a couple tablespoons of it to the center of the dish here. And using the back of your spoon, just kind of in circular motions, just make that circle a little bit wider. It creates a center visual for the plate as well as an anchor for your pastry that you're about to put down.
We'll add the strudel. And you can do sort of like a crisscross sort of thing like this.
You don't want it to look too perfect. You want to kind of create a bit of height and a bit of shape with where you're placing them.
So same with the mushrooms. We then place these in and around the shallots. And you can get a mixture of the oysters and maitakes. It's all about layering with a dish like this.
And then last but not least, we have these microgreens. And again, not too perfect. You want it to look pretty organic. And there you have it.
Mushroom strudel, cauliflower puree, garlic mushrooms, and poached shallots.
Wow, that dish looks amazing. Thank you so much for showing us how to prepare that. Now, I did poke around beforehand on your website, and I noticed for your bio you mentioned something that I thought was really amazing, in that you talked about how food is both an expression of emotion and art. I don't know that a lot of people necessarily see it that way if they're not in like the cook world, and that also it's a sign of togetherness. So tell me a little bit about your background or how that came to be for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're both people that came from families that cooked a lot and celebrated a lot with food. So for us, it's always a really big pleasure to be able to make an amazing dish and then give it to people. It often is a centerpiece, right? And it's because there's a lot of hard work there. There was love into that dish, as corny as it might sound, but everything makes it look a little bit nicer and a little bit more special. So it's fun to take all the different colors that nature gives us and all the different textures and turn it into something that's a complete thought, in the same way that an artist might splash some different colors on a canvas and make an image.
Hopefully this dish inspires some home cooks to get a little more creative in the kitchen and celebrate what they can find at the grocery store, at the market. If you haven't already, we're getting towards the end of the season at the Downtown Windsor Farmers Market. It goes all the way till the end of October, and it is on Polisher Street between Park and Wyandotte. So make your way there, and we'll hope to see you at the market. Thanks everyone, bye.